In the span of just a few days, men's tennis lost both of its biggest stars, and the US Open hasn't even started yet. First, it was Carlos Alcaraz, still sidelined by the wrist injury that's already wiped out 5 tournaments this year. Now it's Jannik Sinner, the world #1, the man who just won his 5th Grand Slam title at Wimbledon a month ago, announcing his own withdrawal from the Cincinnati Open with a knee injury that's apparently been bothering him since the final ball was struck at the All England Club. Read that again. The 2 best players in men's tennis, ranked 1 and 2 in the entire world, both pulling out of the exact same tournament, in the exact same week, just 3 weeks before the year's final Grand Slam begins. This isn't a coincidence anymore. This is a pattern, and it's a pattern that should have every tennis fan asking the same uncomfortable question. Is something structurally wrong with how this sport is treating its biggest stars? Or are we simply watching 2 isolated injuries collide at the worst possible moment? Sinner's own statement made it sound almost routine. A knee that's been bothering him, working with his medical team since Wimbledon wrapped up, ultimately deciding he wasn't ready to compete. Calm, measured, the language of a champion prioritizing long-term health. But strip away the calm delivery and look at the substance. The reigning world #1, fresh off winning a Grand Slam less than a month earlier, needs over 3 weeks of recovery just to be safe for New York. That's not a throwaway line. That's a genuine admission that his body isn't currently tour-ready. And Alcaraz's situation, as anyone following this story already knows, is far more severe. 5 months, 6 tournaments, a wrist injury that still hasn't been fully explained to the public in any real medical detail. So here's where that leaves the US Open. Less than a month before the biggest stage in tennis. Its 2 most recognizable stars, its 2 most bankable draws, both walking in cold, both carrying real physical question marks, both essentially betting that they can skip live competition entirely and still be ready to win best-of-5 matches against a field that's had the entire summer to sharpen up. Is that a plan, or is that wishful thinking dressed up as caution? Let's break down exactly how big this preparation gap actually is, because the numbers here are genuinely staggering once you line them up. Alcaraz hasn't played a competitive match since April. Over 4 months of silence, 5 tournaments erased from his season, including 2 Grand Slams. Sinner, by comparison, looks almost fine on paper. He's only missing 1 tournament, right? Except that's not quite the full picture. Sinner hasn't played since his Wimbledon final win over Zverev in mid-July. That's nearly a month of inactivity already. And now, with Cincinnati gone too, that gap stretches to well over 6 weeks by the time the US Open actually begins on August 30th. 6 weeks without a competitive match, for the world #1, heading into a Grand Slam. That's not nothing. That's the kind of layoff that for almost any other player would trigger real concern about match rust. The only reason it isn't dominating headlines the way Alcaraz's absence has is because Sinner's gap is shorter and his recent results, a Wimbledon title, a genuine Grand Slam just weeks ago, are still fresh enough to paper over it. But here's the uncomfortable comparison nobody wants to make out loud. While Sinner and Alcaraz have been sitting out, the rest of the field hasn't stopped. Alexander Zverev has been grinding through the entire summer hard-court swing, picking up matches, building rhythm, sharpening his game against real opposition week after week. Novak Djokovic, even with his own mysterious Cincinnati withdrawal, has at least been closer to the tour than either Sinner or Alcaraz this month. And a wave of hungry, in-form players sitting just outside the very top of the rankings have spent this entire stretch accumulating exactly the kind of match sharpness that Sinner and Alcaraz are now missing. Think about what that means for the actual draw in New York. 2 out of the 3 biggest stars in the sport will walk into Arthur Ashe Stadium, having played a combined total of 0 matches in the month leading up to the tournament. Meanwhile, players ranked 5, 6, 7, 8 in the world will be arriving with a full summer of competitive tennis in their legs, sharp, confident, and with absolutely nothing to lose against a wounded giant in an early round. This is exactly the kind of environment where genuine upsets happen. Not because the top players suddenly became less talented, but because talent alone doesn't fully compensate for match sharpness at the elite level, especially across best-of-5 sets where physical and mental endurance matter as much as raw shot-making ability. Now let's talk about what this means for the psychology of the entire draw, because injuries don't just affect the injured player, they change how every other contender approaches the tournament. Put yourself in the shoes of a player ranked 5 through 15 in the world right now. For years, the ceiling in men's tennis has felt fixed. Sinner and Alcaraz sitting at the top, seemingly untouchable, trading Grand Slams back and forth, while everyone else fought for scraps. That's been the story of this entire era. But suddenly, in the space of 1 August, both of those immovable objects have shown very real, very public cracks. Alcaraz hasn't proven he's tournament fit in nearly half a year. Sinner is walking in cold after over 6 weeks away, with a knee issue that clearly wasn't minor enough to just play through. That changes the mentality of everyone else in the draw. Belief is contagious in sport, and right now, every ambitious player left in this field has real, tangible evidence that the top of men's tennis is more vulnerable than it's been in years. Zverev already knows he can beat these two. He's done it before, including at a Grand Slam final level. But now imagine the players just below him: Ben Shelton, Jack Draper, Holger Rune, players hungry for their own breakthrough moment, who spent this entire summer sharpening their games specifically because they sensed an opening. That opening just got significantly wider. There's also a deeper, more uncomfortable storyline buried in all of this: the question of whether men's tennis is quietly entering a genuine changing of the guard, whether anyone wants to admit it publicly or not. For years, Sinner and Alcaraz were spoken about as the two players who would define this entire era of the sport, the way Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic once did. But eras don't announce their endings cleanly. They erode gradually, through moments exactly like this one: a wrist that won't fully heal, a knee that flares up right when it matters most. Withdrawal after withdrawal piling up until, eventually, the throne simply isn't as secure as everyone assumed it was. Nobody is saying Sinner and Alcaraz are finished. That would be wildly premature, especially for two players still in their early to mid-20s. But the aura of invincibility that surrounded both of them, the sense that they were simply operating on a different physical plane than the rest of the tour, has taken real, visible damage this summer. And auras, once cracked, are notoriously difficult to fully repair, especially heading into a tournament where every rival in the draw now has fresh proof that the two men at the top are just as breakable as anyone else. So what actually happens now for the US Open? Let's lay out the realistic outcomes for a tournament that's suddenly walking in with far more uncertainty than anyone expected a month ago. Scenario 1. Both men use their remaining weeks to fully heal, arrive in New York healthy, and simply rely on class and big match experience to overcome any rust. It's happened before. Elite champions have skipped preparation events and still gone deep into Grand Slams purely on talent and instinct. If either Sinner or Alcaraz pulls this off, it becomes one of the more impressive title runs in recent memory, purely because of how little live tennis backed it up. Scenario 2. The rust shows immediately. One or both of them run into a hungry, in-form opponent in the first week, someone who spent the entire summer sharpening their game specifically for a moment like this, and gets bounced earlier than anyone expected. Given how competitive the field has become this season, this is far from a fringe possibility. It's arguably the more likely outcome for at least one of them. Scenario 3, and maybe the most dramatic version: the physical issues resurface mid-tournament. A knee that flares up again under the pressure of best-of-5 tennis. A wrist that can't hold up across a full fortnight of Grand Slam intensity. Either of these would turn what's already a shaky preparation story into a genuine crisis, unfolding in real time, in front of the biggest tennis audience of the year. And here's the layer that makes this even messier. The tournament itself is affected, not just the two players. The US Open depends on its biggest stars going deep for ratings, ticket sales, and storylines. A draw where both Sinner and Alcaraz exit early doesn't just disappoint their fans. It reshapes the entire tournament narrative, potentially handing the spotlight to Zverev, to Djokovic chasing one more legendary run, or to a completely unexpected breakout star nobody saw coming in early August. Whatever happens, one thing is already true regardless of how the tournament plays out. The build-up to this US Open looks nothing like anyone predicted even a few weeks ago. Instead of a coronation for whichever of Sinner or Alcaraz proves dominant, we're heading into New York with genuine, wide-open uncertainty at the very top of men's tennis for the first time in years. So where does this leave men's tennis, as the sport barrels toward its final Grand Slam of the year, with more uncertainty at the top than anyone anticipated? For years, The story of this era felt almost predictable. Sinner and Alcaraz, trading Grand Slams, trading rivalries, seemingly destined to define the sport for the next decade, the way Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic once did. That predictability is gone, at least for now. In its place is something far more compelling, and far more uncertain. A US Open where the two biggest stars in the sport are walking in wounded, undercooked, and genuinely vulnerable for the first time in years. Maybe this ends up being nothing more than a strange, forgettable footnote. Two isolated injuries that happened to overlap at an unfortunate moment, quickly forgotten once Sinner and Alcaraz both go on to deep runs in New York anyway, reminding everyone why they've dominated this sport in the first place. Champions have overcome worse preparation gaps before, purely on class and instinct. But if the rust shows, if either of them, or both, stumble earlier than expected against hungrier, sharper opponents who spent the summer exactly preparing for a moment like this could be remembered as the tournament where the balance of power in men's tennis genuinely, visibly shifted. Not through one dramatic upset, but through the quiet accumulation of missed tournaments, vague injury updates, and a field that finally caught up while the sport's two biggest names were forced to watch from the sidelines. Either way, one thing about this US Open is already certain, regardless of how the results play out once the draw begins. This is no longer a coronation, it's wide open, and for the first time in years, absolutely nobody can say with confidence who's actually walking out of Arthur Ashe Stadium as champion. We're about to find out. Is the throne finally up for grabs?